Jnanam paramam dhyayam. Knowledge is supreme.
Friends, let us summarize what we have learnt in the last couple of lectures. So, we have learned how to deduce the rate law from experimental data, and we have learned how to find a mechanism for a given heterogeneous catalytic reaction, and then we had looked at how to find the rate parameters concerning the rate law, and then we had looked at how to design a packed bed reactor and how to find the profile of the conversion as a function of the weight of the catalyst in the last couple of lectures. So, while doing all this, we have assumed that the catalyst activity, that is the number of active catalyst sites which is available for the reactants to adsorb onto the catalyst site for the reaction to occur, is always constant. But unfortunately, Mother Nature is not so kind, and it turns out that the catalyst activity does not remain constant. So, we always assume that the catalyst activity is constant, but the catalyst activity changes with time. Now, what does it mean? It means that the total number of active sites which may be available for adsorption of the reactant species onto the catalytic site for the catalytic reaction. Now, that total number of active sites Ct, which is the concentration of the total concentration of the active sites, so that is not a constant. Now, what happens if it is not constant? So, what happens is that the catalyst actually gets deactivated. So, there is a catalyst deactivation process. There is a catalytic deactivation process. In fact, it is a very major problem that is faced by most of the industries when they conduct a catalytic reaction. It is known to strongly affect the conversion, and as a result the performance of the reactor itself. So, catalyst deactivation is a very, very serious problem, and it is very important to understand how this deactivation occurs, and are there mechanisms, are there ways by which one can actually circumvent the catalytic deactivation process in a reactor. Deactivation is essentially a process by which the active sites which may be present in the catalyst spore that is somehow not available for the reactants to go and adsorb. Okay. So, let us describe a little bit more about deactivation. So, deactivation suppose if there is a catalyst, if there is a catalyst support in which a particular catalytic material is actually impregnated, and let us say that these are the pores. These are the pores which is present on the catalyst, inside which there are active sites. And suppose let us say I zoom up one of the pores which may be present inside the catalyst, and so if this is a pore and the active sites are actually present. So, if these are the active sites which may be present in the pore, onto which the reactants can adsorb in order for a catalytic reaction to take place. Now, after a certain time, after the catalyst is actually used for a certain time, for various reasons, these active sites reduce in number. The number of active sites which may be present, that reduces, and you can see that the number of sites which is available for adsorption of the reactant species for the reaction goes down as a function of time. So, this process of loss of the catalytic sites for the reactants to adsorb and to facilitate the catalytic reaction is what is called as catalyst deactivation. In this lecture and in the next lecture, we are going to see different types of deactivation, what are all the mechanisms that govern the deactivation process, and how to incorporate that in the reactor design is what we are going to see in the next couple of lectures. So, as in the case of any process which is involved in a catalytic reaction, the first step is to understand how to get the rate law. So, in this case, how to find the rate law with in the presence of catalyst deactivation. So, this can be broadly classified into two different types. One where it is called the separable kinetics, and another one it is called the non-separable kinetics. So, separable kinetics is one where the dynamics of the adsorption, catalyst deactivation process and the actual kinetics of the catalytic reaction, these two can be independently modeled and the mechanisms can be independently understood, while the non-separable kinetics is where it cannot be looked at independently. So, in the case of separable kinetics, in the case of separable kinetics, one can actually write the net rate law. Suppose if A is the reactant which is catalytically reacting in order to form products B, then one could actually write a rate law which looks like this, where A is the activity of the catalyst, which depends only on the past history of the catalyst multiplied by the reaction rate as if the catalyst were to be fresh. That means that the deactivation kinetics and the actual kinetics of the catalytic reaction can be looked at separately and independently, and so the activity is only a function of the past history, and that scaled with the reaction rate, if it were to be a fresh catalyst, is what gives what is the reaction rate and what is the reaction rate at a particular level at which the deactivation has occurred. So, this suggests that the catalyst decay and kinetics are independent. So, in this model of separable kinetics, the catalyst decay and the kinetics of the catalytic reaction are independent. Now, what happens in the non-separable kinetics? In non-separable case, in the non-separable kinetics case, the non-separable kinetics case, the net reaction rate, the rate at which the species A is being consumed, is now dependent both on the past history and the rate as if the catalyst was not deactivated, that is, what is the rate if the catalyst were to be a fresh catalyst. So, it depends both on the properties or the nature of deactivation simultaneously along with the actual reaction rate of the catalytic reaction. So, which suggests that the deactivation perhaps happens via many elementary steps. So, in the next couple of lectures, we will not deal with the non-separable kinetics, which will be dealt with separately later. So in this couple of lectures, we will only be looking at the separable kinetics. Now, when we talk about separable kinetics, the most important quantity that needs to be described is the activity of the catalyst. So, A of t, which is the activity of the catalyst, is defined as the rate, the reaction rate on the catalyst for a given activity or at a given time, divided by the rate, the reaction rate in the same catalyst if it were to be a fresh catalyst. Okay. So it is the reaction rate after the catalyst has been used after a certain time t, divided by the reaction rate if it is a fresh catalyst. Now, it is important to realize that the maximum activity is possible only in a fresh catalyst. So, it is important to realize that the maximal activity, that is the maximum possible sites, may be available for the catalytic reaction when the catalyst is fresh. So, therefore, it is important to, so the exercise is going to be as to how to characterize and how to obtain the deactivation process as a function of time in the presence of catalytic reaction. So, naturally the activity of the catalyst is going to change with time, and the typical profile it starts with 1 because it is a fraction, and it is a fraction of catalyst, that is activity which is left, and so it goes from, it exponentially decreases with time. So, clearly the A of t decreases with time. So, suppose if there is a reaction, so how do we write the reaction rate law when there is catalytic deactivation process occurring simultaneously? So, suppose if the catalytic reaction is A plus B plus gives P plus D plus. So, now we can write the rate of consumption of species A because of catalytic reaction as the product of activity of the catalyst multiplied by the corresponding specific reaction rate, which is dependent on the temperature at which the reaction is being conducted, multiplied by some function which is a function of the concentration of all the species that may be participating. So, let us stare at this equation a bit. So, A t is the activity, is the instantaneous activity of the catalyst, K t is the specific reaction rate, and it is a function of temperature. So, as you increase the temperature, the specific reaction rate increases, and this is some function of the concentration of species, how it affects the reaction rate law, and that is what is captured by this function f n. So, now the decay rate, so as the catalytic deactivation occurs simultaneously along with the catalytic reaction. So, there has to be a certain decay rate. So, the decay rate can be captured in terms of the properties or the quantities of the species, that is the concentration of various species which is present, and so that can be written in the following form. So, the decay rate typically takes the same form as that of the rate law. So, therefore, the decay rate R d is given by is minus dA by dt that reflects the rate of change of activity with respect to time, and that should be equal to some function p which depends on the activity itself multiplied by the corresponding specific decay constant which is a function of temperature multiplied by some function of concentration of all the species. So, clearly from here you can see that R t depends on the activity, it is proportional to the concentration of species. So, therefore, it is important to know the concentration and it is important to find out what is the functional form of this P in order to estimate what is the catalyst decay rate. So, for the purpose of this course, we will assume that H of C I, which is basically the dependence of the concentration on the decay rate law, as 1 or at most as H of C I to be equal to C I. That is, it is either does not depend upon the concentration of the species, or we will assume that it depends at most linearly on the concentration of the species. So, and also we will assume that this function P which takes the functional form of the activity of the catalyst depends on what is the catalytic system, that is what is the catalytic reaction, what is the catalytic reaction that is being conducted. We will assume that this dependence of the activity, the functional form that captures the dependence of the activity on the decay rate will depend upon the reaction which is being conducted and also on the deactivation mechanism, which we will describe shortly. So, suppose if it were to be a first order decay, if the decay process is first order with respect to the activity, then if it is a first order process, then P of A will be equal to A, and if it is a second order process, then P of A will be equal to A square. So, depending upon what is the order of the dependence of the activity on the decay rate, we can accordingly assume a certain dependence of P on the activity itself. Now, the decay of the catalytic sites, that is the loss of catalytic sites in a catalyst, will depend upon many different aspects. So, based on the nature of the loss or the type of loss of the catalytic activity, there are three broad classifications have been identified, and these are sintering / aging process. So, this essentially captures the loss of the catalyst because of long exposure of the catalytic sites to the reaction, and then the fouling or coking process. So, this is essentially the deposition of various carbonaceous or coke material on the catalyst site. The deposition of the coke on the catalyst site, it leads to strong deactivation of the catalytic sites, and it is possible to regenerate the catalyst, which we will describe later. And then the third type of deactivation of the catalyst is called the poisoning process. So, there may be poison present in the feed stream which may enter the catalyst pores, and they may get deposited on the catalyst site, and that may destroy the activity of the catalyst, or the reactants or the products itself may actually go and irreversibly bind or get adsorbed onto the catalyst surface, and as a result may poison the activity of the catalyst site, and therefore deactivating the catalyst itself. So, we will see in detail what these three different types are and how to characterize what are the mechanisms that are associated with each of these deactivation processes, and how to find the rate law for each of them. So, let us take the first one, which is the sintering process, sintering method of deactivation. let us take the sintering method of deactivation. So, sintering is basically the deactivation of the catalyst because of the prolonged exposure of the catalytic sites to the reactants on the gas stream which is present, and as a result, because the reactions are conducted at a high temperature, the metal particles which act as a catalyst and which are impregnated on the catalyst site. So, that actually leaves the catalytic sites and then they start agglomerating together, and as a result the net surface area which is available for the reactants to go and adsorb onto the catalytic site, that significantly reduces, and as a result the catalyst activity is completely lost. So, this can be captured. So, there are two causes for sintering. One is the prolonged exposure, and the second is the crystal agglomeration and growth. So, this can actually be captured in this figure here. So, suppose if this is a catalyst, and there are several catalyst sites which are actually spread across in various locations on the catalyst, and let us say that this is the cross section of the catalyst. So, we cut open the catalyst particle and this is the cross section. So, now if the catalyst is exposed to the reactants to the gas stream for a very long time, so it is a prolonged exposure, then what happens is that the particles, they start agglomerating, together, and so they get deposited, and the metals which may be present, the noble metals which may be present at a specific location, they start agglomerating and they start growing together in a specific location. And so this can be depicted like this. So, all the catalyst particles, they start migrating to and agglomerating in one location, and as a result the activity of the catalyst is completely destroyed. And so, this process is what is called as a sintering or aging process. Now, the other method by which sintering can happen is basically called as the pore narrowing or closing. So, the pores which are actually present in the catalyst, so which contains the catalytic sites, so because of this prolonged exposure to these reacting gas and at a very high temperature, the various particles can actually go and clog the pores and thereby block the pores, and therefore the catalytic activity is destroyed. So, that can be captured in this way. So, suppose here is a catalyst and there are these catalytic sites, there are these pores which are present here, and at the start of the reaction, that is at time t equal to 0. So, if I zoom up this pore here, so you will see that, so these catalysts which are present in various locations, so they are present inside the pore here. Now, after certain time, when the reaction occurs for a long time, after a certain long period of time, then the catalyst pores will get blocked, will get filled with this material, and so clearly the pores will get blocked and therefore they get closed, and as a result the activity of the catalyst is lost. So, the sintering process can actually be prevented. Remember that the temperature is a major factor in the deactivation of the catalyst by the sintering or aging mechanism. So, therefore, the sintering can be prevented if the reaction is conducted at a temperature which is less than 40% of the melting temperature of the solid. If the reaction can be conducted at a temperature which is less than the 40% of the melting temperature, then the sintering process can be significantly reduced. So this is a remedial measure for sintering. However, there are several reactions which one may not be able to conduct these reactions at such a low temperature, because the conversion that is desired is a strong function of the temperature. So the temperature at which the reaction has to be conducted is very important, because the higher is the temperature, then there is a chance that for exothermic reactions the reaction rate is going to be higher. So as a result, it's not always possible to conduct the reaction at a significantly lower temperature. So one has to look at different aspects of the catalytic reaction while deciding what is the correct method to conduct the reaction in order to avoid sintering or aging method of deactivation.